I want to talk about the question of whether there's an actual civil war brewing in the Democratic Party, something that could completely upend one of our two major parties and fundamentally change its leadership and its direction. After last week's sweep by three candidates in New York City, endorsed by Mayor Zohran Mamdani, the headline screamed that the Democratic establishment was frantic because the results were, in the words of Politico, a massive sledgehammer to the Democratic establishment in New York and far beyond as voters moved even further to the left. But I think this is a case of the media getting it all wrong, intentionally and with malice aforethought. Let me warn you that I could be wrong about that. It's quite possible that when Jonathan pops on in a moment and I ask him, he's going to tell me that I'm off base. It's quite possible that when today's Colorado primaries are all done, the progressive candidates might romp and every analyst out there will be making it sound like I'm all wrong. But I can live with that. Let me at least make my case to you. You ever see one of those optical illusions? There's a version that we do to our own minds when we construct stories to try to explain what's happening in the world around us. For example, one can look at what happened in New York and say, three progressives, two of them avowed Democratic Socialists, won, therefore progressivism and democratic socialism are on the rise. But in statistics, there's an effect known as omitted variable bias. It's what it sounds like. If you leave a key factor out of your analysis, other factors take the credit. And I think that's what's going on here. The omitted factor is change. Change is the most potent psychological driver in American politics, not only today, but for decades running. In fact, I would argue that if you look back at every single election since 1992, with only one exception, the party that best represented change is the party that won. The only difference in recent years is that change has taken on a bitter edge of desperation. Right after the 2024 election, 53% of voters told pollster David Shor that things are going so poorly in America that what's needed goes beyond mere change and that what they wanted was, quote, a shock to the system. 3/4 of voters told Navigator Research recently that the American political and economic system needs major changes or, quote, should be torn down completely. Even 27% of Kamala Harris voters told AP pollsters that they wanted complete and total upheaval in how the country is run. And that figure was 71% for Trump voters. Since the election of Donald Trump in 2016, pundits have been asking, what are voters thinking? Don't they know who this man is? And the answer is yes. Voters understood that if this was a choice between Batman and the Joker, a deeply flawed figure trying to keep the system, versus a psychopath who wanted to blow everything up, they wanted the Joker. They wanted the crazy guy covered in face paint who would shake things up even if it was a horrible disruption, because at least it was change. This was a desperate cry for help. And for Democrats, the desperation is all the greater because they have that same deep desire for change, that same frustration with the status quo, but it's compounded with their outrage over Trump. So what Democrats want now, and what we're seeing in the election results now, is two things: change and fight. Data journalist Elliott Morris measured Democrats' feelings toward a whole range of politicians and noted that they feel warmest toward fighter-coded figures. And he reached the same conclusion that I'm offering to you. He said, I do think this is about fighting Trump and the weakness of the Democratic establishment and not really about ideology. So when you get rid of the omitted variable bias and you put in the change and the fight factor and look again at New York's results, what do you see? Because what I see is voters screaming another desperate cry for help. Give us people who represent change. Give us people who will fight. But that's not what you're going to hear from a right-wing media like Fox News, who's thirsting for the socialism narrative because it's their last best chance to pump up the Republican Party in the midterm elections. And it's not what you're going to hear from the mainstream media, who just want to see a party bloodbath because if it bleeds, it leads, and damn, do they need the ratings. Am I right? Am I wrong? Let's hear from one of my favorite guests. Do you see the results in New York and the results we've seen writ large for Democrats around the country as a thirst for change and fighters, or a growing preference for far left progressivism and even, dare I say it, socialism?
So first of all, I think it's extremely difficult to accurately be determinative about not just results, but also voters. Like when you poll voters generally, the common denominator among most voters and non-voters who are an important voting bloc as well, is that they don't know things, right? That's the reality. The number of people who don't know major US officials, don't even know their names, let alone their office or their positions, is massive. But I do want to push back on the framework that you set up, which was like change in fight. Is it change in fighters, or is it far left progressivism slash ideology? They don't know about most of this stuff. They don't read the stuff we do or the stuff that your listeners do. They don't watch or listen to the podcasts that your listeners do or that mine do. They're just not engaged to that extent. But the reason I wanted to push back on your framing, the construct, is because I don't think you can separate change and fighting from ideology and, in this case, far left progressivism. Because change from what, right? Fighting for what, right? You can't separate those things out. If you got someone up there who was just extremely bombastic, fighting for JD Vance, fluoridization of the water, people aren't going to be moved by that, right? It's about what they're fighting for, what they're fighting against, which is ideologically inextricable, right? Where Trump is doing things that reflect whatever his ideology happens to be at the moment those synapses fire, right? I think there's an interesting boomerang effect that we're seeing out there, which is not new, right? We've seen this with Bernie slash Trump crossover, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump voter crossover for years now, where they basically do want government to give people free stuff because people love free stuff, right? That is an ideological position, but that doesn't mean that it hews or adheres neatly to our partisan divisions. So that's why I think you can have people on both sides of the partisan aisle who both want change and both, in some respects, would be quite happy with similar ideologies.
That's interesting. I actually think you've hit on something very important that I wrote about for Newsweek over a year ago, which is I think Donald Trump got one thing fundamentally right, and he's awfully close to Bernie Sanders on it. The one piece that Democrats really need to wrap their brain around, and Sanders, to his credit, even though he's not my personal ideological cup of tea, to Sanders' credit, he diagnosed it and enunciated it well over the years. And it really rhymes with what Trump got right in 2015 and 2016. This fundamental diagnosis of what's happened to far too many Americans economically, the raw deal that they justifiably feel that they've gotten in recent decades, and the sense of hopelessness and frustration that's set in. And that's what metastasizes into this feeling of not just change, which I still submit is the dominant driver in American politics in recent decades, but this kind of destructive, revolutionary kind of change that people seem to want, this willingness that they're telling pollsters, as I outlined, that they'd rather tear the whole system down and start fresh. And they're willing to vote for agents of that kind of extreme change. So I see your point that you have to do both things. If you're Zohran Mamdani, you have to both say, what I'm fighting for is your costs are too high. And you can say it in various code ways that get through to voters, as he effectively did. It's halalflation. It's freeze the rent. It's free buses. It's plain English.
Yeah.
It's plain English that's not dressed up in all kinds of like Washingtonese, that basically says to people, I care about whether you can afford to live in this city. And lo and behold, he's seen as a fighter, a change agent who generally aligns with voters' number one concern. Lo and behold, he wins.